My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 72 years old, and last week my only son looked me in the eye across his dining table and told me, "The best gift would be if you just died." I can still feel how the words sliced through me like a knife. There I was, holding the tiny glass of wine they had poured for me, smiling politely, waiting for a slice of cake. But instead of love, or gratitude, or even the smallest kindness, that sentence spilled from his lips. Everyone froze, his wife Monica, my two grandchildren, even the dog that had been begging at the table. My hands trembled so badly, I had to set my glass down before it shattered. I wanted to scream, to ask him how a child I carried, raised, and fed through nights of hunger could say such a thing. But something inside me went quiet,
Calm.
cold, and I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Then tonight you've gotten your wish, because from this moment I am canceling all the funding." He blinked, confused, and Monica's fork slipped from her hand with a loud clang against her plate. The room spun with silence, but my voice didn't shake. Every check, every wire transfer, every cent that has kept this house of yours standing, I'm done. My son's jaw dropped. Monica gasped like she'd been slapped. My grandchildren looked from one face to another, not understanding but sensing the storm. I stood slowly, my knees aching, my heart beating like it wanted to leap from my chest. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. My son rose halfway out of his chair, as if to stop me, then sank back down when he saw the steel in my face. "Do you think a mother should keep funding a son who wishes her dead? Would you have stayed at that table?" I didn't. I stepped outside into the night air, my body trembling, my heart broken in ways I didn't think were possible at this age. But you might be wondering, what could drive a child to spit such cruelty at his own mother? That's where the story really begins, and it goes back years, long before this night that finally opened my eyes. When I was younger, before the wrinkles carved their maps into my skin, I believed life would reward sacrifice. I was a teacher in a small public school, the kind of woman who packed 2 sandwiches every morning, one for myself, one for the child in class who I knew had nothing. My husband died when our son Richard was 12 years old. Heart attack, quick and cruel. It left me with a boy still in need of guidance and a mountain of bills stacked on the kitchen counter. I worked nights tutoring and spent weekends sewing for neighbors. Every extra dime went to keeping Richard's life steady. When other boys had new sneakers, I stitched the holes in his. When other families went on vacations, I promised him that one day, when I was able, I would make sure he could see the world. I clung to his smile as my reward. Richard was a sweet boy then. He would hug me after school and say, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know. One day, I'll take care of you the way you take care of me." I believed him with all my heart. How could I not? A mother holds on to hope like it's air. But looking back now, I can't help but wonder, were those words just what I wanted to hear? Did he ever mean them? Or did he learn early that saying the right thing would open my wallet and my heart a little wider? Richard grew into a tall, handsome man, the kind who could charm anyone in the room with a smile. And when he brought Monica home for the first time, I prayed she would love him as I did. At first, she was all politeness, smiling, helping me clear the dishes, calling me Mrs. Hayes. But even then, I could see the flicker at her eyes when I corrected Richard's table manners or asked him about work. When they decided to marry, it was me who emptied nearly half of my savings to pay for the wedding. I wanted to believe I was setting them on a path of happiness. I bought Monica her dream dress, I covered the catering, even paid for the honeymoon. My friends whispered that I was too generous, that I was spoiling them. But what is a mother for if not to give until she has nothing left? I remember moving day, standing in front of the little house I had helped them buy with another check I could barely afford to write. I carried a box of Richard's old books inside, trying to hide my tears of joy. Monica brushed past me with another box and leaned close enough that only I could hear. She whispered, "You won't be needed around here anymore." The words stung, sharp and dismissive. I told myself she didn't mean it, that maybe she was just tired from moving. But sometimes it's the smallest sentences that echo the loudest, and I still hear that whisper in my mind. The years that followed brought little cracks that widened no matter how hard I pressed my love into them. Richard stopped calling every week, then every month, until the phone hardly rang at all. When I visited, Monica would force a smile, but her eyes rolled whenever I asked about the children. She made me feel like an unwelcome guest in the very house I helped them buy. I remember one Christmas when I showed up with gifts wrapped in red paper. The children squealed with joy, but Monica pursed her lips and said, "You didn't need to spend money on this, Eleanor. They have enough junk." Richard just stood there, staring at his phone, as if my presence were an inconvenience rather than a blessing. I tried to ignore the signs, telling myself it was just busy schedules, modern life, nothing personal. But one afternoon, as I was setting out cookies in the kitchen, I heard Monica's voice drift in from the living room. "Your mom is a burden. We need her money, not her presence." I froze, the plate trembling in my hands, cookies sliding to the floor. Did I mishear? Or had she said exactly what I thought? Richard didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was in a low voice I could barely make out. "Just leave it alone." But he didn't defend me. He didn't stop her. He let the words hang in the air like smoke that seeped into every corner of my heart. The breaking point came one evening when Richard sat across from me at my kitchen table, his tone polished, his words rehearsed. "Mom, I need $50,000, he said. He called it an investment in his new business. He spoke with such confidence, such certainty, that I convinced myself it was true. I signed over nearly everything left in my retirement account. But weeks turned into months, and there was no business, no investment, no returns. Instead, I began to notice their social media posts, beach vacations, new cars, luxury dinners. My money hadn't gone into a company. It had gone into their pleasures. When I finally confronted him, my voice shaking with both anger and heartbreak, he didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "You owe me. I never asked to be born. You did this to yourself. The least you can do is pay me back for it." I sat there, stunned. Do you know what it feels like to realize the child you gave everything for sees you not as a mother but as a debt collector? My chest ached, but I swallowed the tears because I knew if I started crying, I might never stop. After I gave him that money and he spit those cruel words at me, something inside me started to wither. The house felt emptier than it ever had before, even though I lived alone. My phone barely rang, and when it did, it was usually Richard asking for more money. I would wait by the window sometimes, hoping maybe he and the kids would surprise me, just show up to check in, to see if I needed anything. But no car ever pulled into my driveway. I would sit on the couch with the TV on low, listening to the clock tick, wondering how a woman who had poured everything into her family could feel so invisible. One winter morning, I woke up on the kitchen floor. My head throbbed and my body ached. I had fainted, and when I finally managed to crawl to the phone and dial 911, the silence in the house screamed at me louder than the pain. At the hospital, doctors told me I had pneumonia and needed to stay a few nights. I lay there under the stiff sheets, staring at the ceiling, expecting at any moment Richard would come through the door, maybe even Monica, maybe the grandchildren. But days passed and no one came. The nurses would pat my arm and ask, "Any family visiting today?" And I would smile weakly and say, "They're busy." But the truth was, they didn't come because they didn't care. Do you know that kind of loneliness? when the people you love most don't even notice if you're alive or dead. On my third night there, I overheard something that still makes my stomach twist. Richard and Monica had finally shown up, but not to see me. They didn't realize I could hear them from the hallway outside my room. Monica's voice was sharp as a knife. If she dies soon, we'll finally get everything. We just have to be patient. Richard didn't argue. He just sighed like he agreed. My hands went cold. Lying there, I realized my own son was waiting for me to die, and the woman he married was cheering him on. When I came home from the hospital, I walked into my quiet little house, and instead of collapsing into grief, I felt something stir. A whisper inside me saying, "Protect yourself." I couldn't erase what I'd heard. Their plan wasn't love, it was calculation. And for the first time in my life, I started thinking about what would happen when I really did die. So, I made an appointment with a lawyer. I remember sitting across the desk, my hands trembling as I explained everything. "I need to change my will," I said. "I need to make sure my son doesn't get everything when I'm gone." The lawyer nodded, like he'd heard this story 100 times before, but to me it was brand new. It felt like betrayal carved into my bones. I asked him to set up a scholarship in my husband's name, a foundation that would help kids from broken families go to college. I thought about those hungry children I used to feed when I was teaching, how many of them had dreams bigger than their bank accounts. I wanted my money to go to them, not to people waiting for me to die. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter than I had in years. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Richard and Monica thought they had me trapped, thought I was too old, too weak, too soft. They had no idea what was coming. I told myself, if they want me gone, they're going to learn what gone really means. After the will was signed, Richard's behavior suddenly changed. Almost overnight, he started showing up with flowers, calling every day, even asking if I needed groceries. It might have fooled someone else, but I knew the truth. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking past me, to the money he thought he was still going to get. Monica even baked me a pie one afternoon, smiling so sweetly, it almost made me laugh. But then she slipped up. As we sat at the kitchen table, she leaned forward and asked, "So, how much is left in the bank now?" She tried to make it sound casual, but her voice cracked just enough to expose the truth.
She didn't care about me.
She cared about the account. I nodded politely, pretended not to notice. Let them think they still had me fooled. Because I was saving my strength, waiting for the moment when the mask would slip completely. I knew it was coming. And when it did, I would be ready. That moment arrived on my 72nd birthday. They invited me to their house for dinner, and though my gut twisted, I agreed to go. Maybe I wanted to see if there was even a shred of love left. The table was set, candles flickering, the smell of roast chicken filling the room. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe we might share a peaceful evening. They handed me a small gift bag, and inside was a cheap scarf. I smiled politely, thanking them, even though I knew they could afford so much more, especially after everything I'd given them. We sat around the table, and I asked to see the children's report cards. Monica rolled her eyes. Richard sighed. It was as if my very presence was unbearable to them. And then it happened. Richard set down his fork, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "You keep asking what I want for my birthday this year. Well, the best gift would be if you just died." The room fell silent. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to crumble, but instead, something in me turned to stone. I stood up slowly, placed my napkin on the table, and said, "Then tonight you've gotten your wish. Because I am canceling all the funding." Monica's fork clattered to the plate. Richard's face turned pale. The children stared wide-eyed. And I walked out of that house, leaving their stunned silence behind me. But that was only the beginning of what came next. Do you think they let me walk away quietly? Not a chance. Within days, the calls began. Richard begging, Monica crying, messages left on my voicemail about how unfair I was being. "You can't do this to us, Mom," Richard said. "We need that money." But I didn't answer. I let their words sit there, empty, just like the promises they had given me. One evening, I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea when I saw headlights pull into my driveway. Monica stepped out of the car, her face twisted with fury. She stormed up to my porch and pounded on the door. When I opened it, she didn't even try to hide her rage. "You ruined us," she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Her eyes burned with hate, and in that moment, I realized I had just declared war on my own family. When Monica screamed on my porch that I had ruined them, I stood there in the doorway, clutching the frame with one hand to steady myself. The neighbors' lights flicked on, curtains shifted, people were watching. Her voice rose higher, spitting insults, calling me selfish, cruel, even accusing me of betraying my own son. My chest pounded, but I kept my voice calm. I simply said, "Go home, Monica." She didn't move. She lunged forward like she wanted to push past me into my house, but I closed the door firmly before she could. Behind the door, I leaned my head against the wood, my knees shaking. That was the moment I knew. They weren't going to stop. The calls didn't slow down after that night. They grew worse. Richard left me voicemails, his voice cracking between anger and desperation. "Mom, please, you don't understand. Monica's scared. The kids. What about the kids? Don't punish them for our mistakes." But his words fell flat because he had already punished me for years. Each message was like a recycled lie, another performance. Do you think I should have given in? Would you have answered his calls after he wished you dead? I couldn't. I pressed delete on every single one. Then one Sunday morning, I walked into town for the farmer's market. As I browsed the stalls, a man I didn't even know shook my hand and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, for the scholarship. My niece is the first in our family to go to college because of you." His eyes glistened with gratitude. Right there, between the apples and the fresh bread, I felt something my son had stopped giving me long ago: respect. The more I gave to the community, the more alive I felt. I funded school libraries, donated supplies for single mothers, even sponsored summer camps for kids who couldn't afford it. My money wasn't a curse anymore. It was a blessing, and every time I saw a child smile, I thought, this is what love looks like. But of course, Richard couldn't stand it. One evening at a community center event, where I was handing out scholarships, Richard stormed in. His face was red, his hair messy, his voice loud enough to silence the whole room. "This money was supposed to be mine," he shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. The parents, teachers, and kids all stared at him. Whispers spread like wildfire. I stood calmly at the podium, my heart racing but my voice steady as I said, "No, Richard. This money was never yours. It was mine to give, and I choose to give it here." The crowd clapped softly, some even cheered, and Richard stormed out like a spoiled child denied his toy. Later that night, I sat alone in my kitchen, sipping tea, hands still trembling. I thought about how many years I had prayed for my son to be proud of me. But now, the people who truly needed me were the ones who gave me that pride back. And I realized something chilling. My own son wasn't just ungrateful, he was consumed by greed. Soon after, the whole town began to whisper about Richard. People at church avoided him. Parents didn't want their kids at his house. Even Monica's friends drifted away. Greed leaves a stench you can't wash off, and it clung to him everywhere he went. At home, Monica grew colder. I heard through neighbors that she threatened to leave if Richard didn't fix things. He came to my door again, this time not angry but hollow, broken. He begged, "Mom, please, I know I said awful things. But you're still my mother. You can't cut me out completely." I stared at him through the screen door, studying the man I had raised, wondering where that sweet boy had gone. Was he buried under the years, or had he never existed at all? His eyes darted, his hands wrung together. He wasn't sorry. He was desperate. And desperation is not love. I wanted to tell him what he wanted to hear, but instead, the truth slipped from me like a confession. "Richard, you buried me in your heart long before I buried you in my will." His mouth opened, but no words came. He walked away, shoulders sagging, and for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. As the months rolled by, Richard and Monica's world unraveled. Monica eventually left him, taking the children. She couldn't handle the shame, the empty bank account, the broken promises. Richard lost his job, his friends, his reputation. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with the sober knowledge that he had chosen his path. I spent my days surrounded by the community, by people who valued me for who I was, not what I had. I read stories to children at the library. I visited young mothers starting over. I gave speeches at the scholarship events. My heart, once hollow, filled again. Do you believe people can find family outside of blood? I do, because I found mine in strangers who became my legacy. Years later, when my body finally gave out, I didn't die in loneliness. I died in peace, with friends holding my hands and children's laughter echoing down the hallway. And when my will was read, Richard received nothing. Not a cent. Everything went to the scholarships, the libraries, the projects that would live on long after me. I imagine him sitting alone that day, the paper trembling in his hands, the reality sinking in that his greed had cost him everything. No wife, no children near him, no inheritance. Just silence. But my story doesn't end with him. It ends with a truth I want every person listening to carry in their hearts. The true measure of wealth is not in what you keep, but in what you give with love. My son wanted me gone, but what he didn't understand was that you cannot kill love. You cannot kill kindness. Even when people betray you, your choices can ripple out farther than their cruelty. And now I ask you, if your own child looked you in the eyes and told you the best gift would be if you just died, what would you have done? Would you forgive? Or would you finally choose yourself?